Today you're watching TalkTimeTv and we are on Castle Road in Bedford interviewing Bridget Harris, the ex-Deputy Prime Minister's personal advisor and now a business owner of her own. Hello Bridget.
Hi.
I'd like to first start off with getting a bit of background about you. Where have you come from and what have you done to your present age?
I originally come from Scotland, but my family moved around quite a bit, so I've lived in Durham in the northeast and in London for a very long time and also in West Sussex, and now I'm here with my husband and kids living in Bedford. My interest in politics actually stretches as far back as 1987 when I was a candidate in my local school in Durham for the mock general election, and I was standing for the SDP Liberal Alliance party because I got very interested in proportional representation. Very, very simple, just simply about whether the votes as they get cast result in a proportional outcome. And aged 12, I was basically outraged that there was no proportional relationship between the votes cast and the seats that you got. So as a result of that, I became a lifelong supporter of not just proportional representation as an electoral reform, but also political reform generally, constitutional reform, and the way that I was most interested in is the way power gets distributed and the way decisions are made on our behalf. Because at the moment, I think there's a lot of mystery and exclusion really associated with decision making. And for me, it isn't just about the what's the right thing to do with the NHS or what's the right thing to do with, I don't know, enlarging the dual carriageway or something. Those are policy decisions, but I'm primarily interested in the mechanism by which we make a decision. Is it fair? How many people have contributed? Do we have a chance to participate?
So how did you become the political advisor for the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Nick Clegg?
Well, so as I said, my early interest in politics meant that when I went through various jobs and then university, and out the other end of university, I got a job working for Simon Hughes, who's a Lib Dem MP for Southwark and Bermondsey. So that was my first political job in Westminster. And from that was in 1999, so that was nearly 14 years ago. And then from there, I took on other jobs working for the Lib Dems in the House of Parliament, and then I did other jobs. I worked as a special advisor in Wales when the Lib Dems were in coalition with Labour in Wales in 2003. And then after that, I did various other jobs, particularly in local government. So I've done a lot of work in local government with councillors and working in the world of leadership and young people getting involved with politics and women getting involved with politics. And then a year and a half ago, I got a call from people inside the DPM's office inviting me to apply to this position, which was specifically about managing political relations between Lib Dems in the House of Lords, so Lib Dem peers, and the government, because at the time they were considering putting through the House of Lords Reform Bill and lots of other sort of quite controversial legislation. So they wanted, my job was to help sort of smooth the way, as it were, in terms of political relations between the different parts of the system.
Compliments in the workplace. What are your views on this?
I don't have any problem with compliments in the workplace. I think that we all know when something's a laugh and when somebody's being kind of socially flirty and when people are relaxed. And I don't think anybody would ever turn down a compliment and say I like your dress or nice hair or anything like that at all. I think obviously in the news recently we've had a big conversation about when that goes too far and at what point compliments in the workplace actually turn into sexual harassment. And I think that we all know the difference actually between when people are approaching each other in a friendly and sociable way, and then when you actually feel like somebody's being quite sleazy or is taking advantage or is making you feel uncomfortable. And I think we have such highly developed sensors for this kind of thing. We know when somebody makes us feel uncomfortable and we don't like it, and that's why over the years Parliament has passed laws to say that there are certain types of behaviour in the workplace and generally that are against the law, and so when the line's been crossed.
So in your own words, sexual harassment comes in dependent on how the victim feels?
No, not at all. No, it's actually different to that. It depends on whether the behaviour is considered against the law based on the legislation. So there's legislation that describes sexual harassment. There's legislation that describes sexual assault. There's legislation that describes harassment generally. And actually, I think that's a very interesting point that you raise, because how the person who is potentially the victim feels about it is somehow considered to be the relevant point. But actually, you have to think about inequality and harassment in the same way as, let's say, I witnessed somebody stealing my purse. And if somebody has stolen my purse, it's no longer a question of whether I didn't mind because I didn't have any money in it, or whether actually I'm really gutted because I just got 100 quid out from my cash machine this morning. Whether I feel bad or not about it is not the point. The point is, was a theft committed? In which case, was that person who stole my purse considered to be a thief? Now, as a society, we're kind of comfortable with knowing whether somebody's a thief or not, or at least we have we have a legal system to deal with that. But with sexual harassment, we still think there's something kind of vague about it, because it's something, well, because it feels like there's lines that you cross between flirting with somebody and actually harassing them. Well, actually, the law is quite clear about it. And really, any of the victims should actually feel as comfortable coming forward to report it as they would if they were saying somebody stole my purse.
You briefly mentioned about imbalance and power of imbalance. Would you say that it's more easier for a person that has more authority to be accused of sexual harassment or sexual inappropriate behaviour within the workplace than two peers on the same level?
Well, I think it definitely, the inequality or the imbalance between two people will always raise the stakes, as it were, about an interaction, because, I mean, I know it's sort of a posh word, but basically all of this is transactional. So it's like, what are you giving and what are you getting in return, and or what are you trying to get from somebody else? And yes, I mean, in a way, if you're in a position of power and authority, it's incumbent on you to understand that you could well be put in a position where somebody would accuse you of trying to take advantage of that position, and therefore you have to make sure that you are always very careful and very appropriate. And so something that you think would just be a bit of a, maybe just a casual flirtation could be felt differently by somebody if they feel that they are in a weaker position to you, because of course it raises the question of whether there's an abuse of power, whether somebody's being taken advantage of. And so if you know that you're in a position of power, basically what comes with that is responsibility, in a sense that you are responsible for your own behaviour.
Personally speaking, I'm not yet at a position of power, but that makes me feel that you have to now be very careful about. You have to think consciously all the time of what you do, what you say, in what tone you say it, and to whom you say it. I guess that within the future, and hopefully if there's more cases that do arise of sexually inappropriate behaviour in the workplace, that will make bosses, managers, CEOs more cautious and at ease to build relationships with their fellow workers, those that are below them, because they're afraid of being accused of something that to them may be very innocent, however, to another person is crossing the line.
So I think there's a couple of things there. And one is, I think we're all really good at social signals. So we know when we go down the street, when somebody, whistles at us, is that like the biggest issue in the world? Would we rather it didn't happen? Did it sound sleazy? Do we feel insecure? Or is it a bit of a laugh? And we can all have different reactions. And some of us, some women who get whistled at don't like it at all. Others quite like it. And, there's a range of reactions. And it's always based on sort of the case-by-case basis of what's actually happened, and whether, as I said before, the law is saying that what's happened is against the law or not. But I think our social signals about it are actually most of the time sufficient for us to know when we've crossed the line or not. And quite often, and I think this is a really relevant point for men, is that I in no way want to somehow imply that I think men generally are incapable of keeping their hands to themselves or not behaving appropriately. Actually, the vast majority of men I know perfectly well what the boundaries are and how to have a nice time and how to have a good time with their co-workers and with the people that they see on the street. And it's actually a very, very small minority of people who think it's acceptable to cross the line. And we have generally speaking, we have the social signals that will tell us when that's happened. But your second point about, well, will this transform the workplace and make everything very difficult? I would put this, the questions around sexual harassment, I would look back to the 1970s and the 1980s when basically low-level racist language and low-level racist mockery was completely acceptable in the workplace in Britain. So it was perfectly acceptable to round on the immigrant or the person whose religion was different or the person who was, and that sort of thing. I'm not racist, some of my best friends are black, but ... And you hear this but in British cultural life, and we've had it around racism, we've had it around homophobia, we've had it around basic sexism, let alone harassment, but just as simply inequality between the sexes when it comes to pay and conditions and all the rest of it. So I think, considering we've already had that conversation that we know it's not acceptable to be racist or to be homophobic, you can't just make casual gay jokes about people in the workplace and expect to be protected. I think it's the same about women. I don't see why, and it's not about older women who kind of can look after themselves and feel professionally confident. It's not about people like me, actually. It's about 18-year-old girls going into the workplace for the first time. Should they be expected to put up with a boss who might be 30 years older than them, thinking it's okay to have a bit of a flirt around the office desk every morning in a way that makes them feel really uncomfortable because it's the boss doing it? Maybe if the 18-year-old intern comes in and he has a bit of a flirt with them, it might be a bit different. But again, it goes back to the responsibility of and the context of what's happening. So I don't think there should be any problem in most people understanding what we're talking about here, which is the difference between completely comfortable social interaction and being sleazy. And that's what we're saying. Like, don't be sleazy. Just in the same way we're saying, don't be racist, don't be homophobic, don't be sleazy.
With generation, times changes and tolerance changes, and people could say that within the younger generation right now, there's not much of a strict view on what is inappropriate. Do you think that will transition into the workplace as the age of the workplace changes, or rather the era in which the workplace is built on changes?
I think that's a really, really good question, and it's really interesting, and it's almost something that I can't even comment on because I'm immersed in my generation of what the workplace is like. And something that is making a big impact on young people in Britain is their use of social media. And basically, and from sort of a theoretical point, is privacy and how we understand privacy. So my generation understands privacy in a way where you don't share your personal details of your life on a regular basis with people who don't know you, and that is just totally different to young people now who are all using Twitter and Facebook and everything else. Now, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be doing it at all, but it definitely changes the definitions of privacy. And as a result, the follow-on will be that if you have a very kind of open social interaction with your workers through Twitter and Facebook, and including people who are your boss and including people who you work with down the street and so on and so forth, then of course culture is going to change in those workplaces. Things are going to get more, I would say, informal. That doesn't mean to say that standards in terms of the quality of work is going to change, but definitely the way the culture works will definitely change. And I'm all power to culture change, because that is always for a new generation to come in and challenge the standards of behaviour of the bosses and to change it for the way that they want. And then one day they become the bosses. You see, that's the trick though. They become the bosses, and then they start thinking the way they do everything is normal, and then there's a new set of young people coming up annoying them, doing everything differently.
Thank you. How do you think the death of the father of democracy, President Mandela, will politically affect South Africa in the international world, and within the African and Southern African nation?
Well, I think obviously it feels like Nelson Mandela is finally reaching the end of a long and amazing life, and it's one thing that I feel incredibly lucky to be alive at a time when I could remember. I mean, I could remember the 24-hour protest outside South Africa House in Trafalgar Square when I was growing up. I remember when Nelson Mandela was released. As a young politically active person, I was a campaigner against apartheid, and I think that South Africa has gone through an amazing journey that has been held together because of such a figure as Mandela. And what South Africa does next is a very good question. I think that really it's going to rely on actually what happens to a generation of Southern African countries that emerged out of colonial rule into a world where you call him the father of democracy, but in many ways, alongside the long-time rulers of Southern African countries, just like Mugabe in Zimbabwe, just across the border, these countries have emerged out of a language of freedom fighting and independence struggles. And actually, democracy is not the same thing as a struggle. A struggle to gain your freedom is a different type of relationship to democracy where power is shared. So the political landscape in Southern Africa, and I have been to South Africa, and I've been to Zimbabwe, and I've been to Malawi, and I've been to Kenya. So I've seen a lot of different regimes in Southern Africa in the last couple of years. But my reading of it is that right now they are still in a world where it's ironically it's black and white. It's you're either on the side of the freedom fighter, of the independence struggle, and of the emergence away from some of the trauma of colonialism, or you're still sort of living in a world where the exploitation that happened in Southern Africa by colonial countries is still somehow sort of validated. So for South Africa, they are like the most important economic bloc in that continent. They are one of the powerhouses of the economy, and for them to lead Southern Africa into a world where real democracy and real power sharing and a real conversation and choice amongst people, where they vote not on tribal lines but they vote on lines of what public policy decisions they want to happen, and that public money is distributed fairly, and that there isn't any corruption as much as you can in any country. That's the next goal, and it's something where South Africa I don't think is there yet, because it's still a generation of incredibly damaged. The whole of the southern continent has been wrought by the last 150 years. So we probably won't see a really stable and strong and happy political situation in South Africa, and indeed the rest of the region, for probably another 100 years. It's going to take a long time. That said, Africa itself culturally is still incredibly strong. So I have lots of sort of hope and optimism that the people themselves in those countries have got the capacity to empower their own political systems and feel incredibly grateful that somebody like Nelson Mandela, lived amongst them at one point.
At the beginning, I introduced you as an own business owner.
Yeah.
What is your business?
I run a technology company with my husband Keith. Our company is called Softly Software, and we run 3 scheduling tools which sort out people's appointments. So we do When is Good, which finds a time for groups of people to meet. We have a program called You Can Book Me, where you can do personal one-to-one scheduling with somebody. And we have Sign Up Sheet, which is about classes, when a large group of people want to sign up to a one-off event. And those are scheduling tools that we've been running for quite a long time now, but they're doing quite well, and we're growing in America particularly, but all around the world. And so between me and Keith, we run a small company and a very small team of people to grow them. And I was thinking about it the other day, what's the connection between software and technology and politics? And actually, in terms of me personally, it's very much about productivity, because Softly Software focuses on productivity tools, how to make your day-to-day organisation more efficient. And that's, in a way, what I think we should do for the Constitution. Political reform is about making the Constitution more efficient. more productive.
So being within the political sphere, was that what made you think of your company? Or did it come totally separate?
No, well, only, I mean, it partly came because Keith is a software developer, and so between him and me, I didn't have much choice. If you're married to a software developer, you quickly realise, how important software is. But I also think, though, that we've lived through a world where, when I started working in Simon Hughes's office, we did everything on paper. We used very, very limited types of software on our computers. Email and the internet was only just getting going, and there was no social media. So the political landscape about knowledge, because that's basically what politicians and people in Westminster have, is that they have the knowledge and the information about our money and about the way things work and about the people that are doing stuff for us and how to make decisions on behalf of them, and they hold all of that information in 1 square mile in Westminster and Whitehall. And what the internet and what technology has allowed us to do over the last 15 years is take a huge amount of that knowledge and information and spread it out over the internet so anybody can access it. So you've got information about what MPs do, what they say, the policy and the way it gets developed is now online. Departments are being required to publish a lot of stuff that they do. So technology has actually is a different vehicle for delivering actually very similar outcomes about how do you distribute knowledge, how do you make knowledge available to lots of different people, and then by that point you then immediately raise the question, well, how do people access it, and who's making the decision about that information? So I find there's a lot of things in common between my interest in the political structures and my interest in technology, because at the end of the day it's all about managing information.
And finally, what advice would you give to the younger generation aspiring to be successful?
Well, I think that's a very hard question, because I want to be the last person that's sort of preaching to young people and telling them what to do, because I'm sure they've got enough people telling them what to do right now. But what I would say is, going back to your point about how younger people, when they enter the workforce, are going to change the culture of that workforce, and I think that's absolutely right, and it's good, and that's the way it should be. But I think that there's a relationship between when you come into a place and you think that there's there's a lot wrong with it, and sometimes the first instinct is to say, well, I don't like this because I don't want to wear a tie, or I don't like their attitude, or I don't see why I should get up so early, or whatever it is, and walk away. And I suppose my advice is that if you walk away, or if you're waiting for somebody to come around and give you a free sort of a free break, it's not going to happen. The competition for young people and getting training and getting jobs and then working in a global economy is massive, and I think people's employers' standards are really high. And that's not to say that organisations aren't capable of changing or being flexible or finding the right culture fit for you, but I think if you're a young person, you need to expect to work really hard, to try your absolute best, and also to stay true to yourself over, there's plenty of years ahead of you where you can be in positions of power and influence, when you can start to change things the way you think that they should be changed. But at the same time, and I'm not just sort of saying suck it up and put up with bad behaviour, because that's not at all, but at the same time, opportunities are not just going to fall in everybody's laps, and actually we often have to just work incredibly hard to make those opportunities work for us. And there's that famous adage that people say, that the harder I work, the luckier I get. And actually, most of the time, if we have the right attitude and we put the right amount of effort in, then opportunities come our way. And it does feel like we're being very lucky, but at the same time, we're putting ourselves out there.
Thank you very much, Bridget Harris, and we wish you all the best in your future.
Thank you.